In the courtroom, my dad looked proud. "The 7 vacation homes in the Florida Keys are ours." My mom smiled. "That doesn't deserve a cent." The judge opened my letter, scanned it, then laughed hard. He said quietly, "Well, this is interesting." They went pale. That moment, the one where my entire world shifted, began with drama, not with shouting, but with a quiet, unexpected laugh. It was the sound of something breaking wide open. The sound of all the lies unraveling in front of a room full of strangers. And in that instant, I finally felt it: vindication. The kind that settles in your chest and fills you with the cold certainty that the truth is about to flood the room. But before that, before the judge laughed and my parents went pale, there was everything that led me there. It all started with a phone call I wish I had never received. "My name is Thomas Ward. I'm a logistics officer in the United States Navy, and when I came home from deployment 3 months ago, I found myself facing the hardest fight of my life. I'm a foreign battlefield, but with my own family. It was a fight over what my grandmother, Rosalind Ward, left behind. Rosalind was more than just a grandmother to me. She raised me when my parents were too busy with their lives to be bothered. She taught me how to value hard work, honesty, and the importance of family. She was the one who made sure I always had shoes that fit, lunches packed, and someone to clap for me when I won an award at school. She wasn't just family, she was my foundation. The woman who taught me what it meant to stand up for something bigger than myself. When I heard she had passed away, I felt the wave dip in my chest, like I'd lost a part of myself. But amid the grief, there was something else that gnawed at me: a concern. A question about what would happen to the cottages she owned. 7 small, unassuming vacation homes scattered across the Florida Keys. They weren't fancy, but they held so much of her spirit. Each one had its own story, its own history, stories I spent summers helping to preserve. I swept the porches, trimmed the bushes, repainted shutters in the heat of June. Those houses were more than buildings, they were the memories of my childhood. I never thought I would have to fight for them. But when I called my parents to discuss the estate, I was met with something I wasn't prepared for. My dad said, "We're handling everything. No need for you to get involved." My mom, Linda, echoed the sentiment, adding, "You're too busy with your Navy life anyway." And just like that, the door was shut. My parents were handling everything. I tried to let it go. I was still numb from the loss, still trying to get my bearings. I spent the first few days after the funeral visiting grand places: the church on the corner, the old bakery where she bought key lime pie, the dock where she'd sit every evening with sweet tea. People huffed me, cried with me, and told me how much she meant to them. It helped a little. It grounded me. But something wasn't right. I knew in my bones. 3 days after the funeral, I drove to my parents' house, expecting to talk about the estate, the cottages, or at least the funeral arrangements. But when I walked through the door, my dad and mom were sitting stiffly at the dining table, a stack of folders between them. My dad cleared his throat and said, "We've decided to assume full ownership of the property." Full ownership. But Grandma always told me. "She told you nothing," my mom cut in. She wasn't even looking at me when she said it." "But there's a will," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There is no will," my dad replied, each word clipped. "He practiced it. The property's automatically transferred to us." My stomach dropped. "That doesn't sound right," I said, my voice quieter now. "It's the law," my dad insisted. "And, frankly, after everything we've done for those houses, we deserve them." I almost laughed. They hadn't done anything. Grandma had maintained those cottages for decades. I'd helped every summer, every holiday. My parents had barely lifted a finger. Still, I tried to stay calm. Navy training teaches you that anger clouds judgment. Can I at least see the paperwork? My mother stood and gathered the folders in front of her. "There's nothing for you to read," she said, sliding the folders away. "You should be grateful we're not asking you to reimburse us for the funeral." The sting of those words hit harder than I expected. I walked out that night with a pit in my stomach. Something wasn't right. Something was missing. But most of all, where was Grandma's will? Because I knew deep in my bones that she would never leave things in chaos. She was a planner. She made lists. She labeled the back of every photo with who was in it was taken. She wouldn't have left things like this. I was sure of it. A week later, one of Grandma's long-term tenants slipped a plain envelope into my hand as I was visiting the cottages. "She told me to give you this," the tenant said, her voice soft. "Said it was important." Inside the envelope was a short note in Grandma's handwriting. "Anything ever happens to me, look in the safe. You'll know what to do." A safe. She'd never mentioned a safe, but there it was, in black and white, and I knew what I had to do next. I didn't waste any time after I received the envelope. It felt like a lifeline, the one thing that could confirm what I had started to believe. That something wasn't right. The safe was hidden in the most unlikely place, a small, wooden cabinet that my grandmother used to store her old books and photo albums. It was in the back room, tucked behind a worn armchair with fabric faded from years of sunlight. I had walked past that cabinet 100 times without a second thought. But now it was the key to everything. I could feel my pulse quicken as I carefully searched the cabinet. The smooth wood felt solid under my fingers as I slid it open. Behind a stack of books was a small metal box. No bigger than a shoebox. It wasn't locked, just sitting there. It had always been waiting for me. The moment I opened it, I felt a chill run down my spine. Inside was a collection of old property records. Ledgers who had stayed at the cottages over the years, receipts, and bank statements. There were also a few photographs, one of Grandma with a group of her closest friends at a small picnic, and another of her with me, standing in front of the cottages when I was a kid. It was as if she had kept every piece of her life carefully couched, like she always did. And then, there it was. At the very bottom of the box was a document that caught my eye. It was a copy of the deed for the cottages, and below that, an unsigned will. I almost laughed out loud, but it was the kind of laugh that caught in my throat. An unsigned will? I had always been taught that the law didn't care about intentions. A will had to be signed, witnessed, and notarized to have any legal power. But this document, it wasn't nothing. It was a trail. It was proof that my grandmother had wishes clear. She had wanted me to take care of the cottages. I pulled the paper out carefully, as if afraid it would crumble between my fingers. I scanned it quickly, trying to take in every detail. It was short, simple, nothing like the legal jargon I was used to reading in my job. It named me as the custodian of the cottages, with specific instructions to maintain them as affordable homes for the local community. I felt a rush of warmth and anger. She had trusted me. But my parents, they hadn't meant the existence of this document. The anger was quick to follow the warmth. My parents had already tried to steal something that wasn't theirs. These properties, yes. But more than that, they had tried to steal the memory of my grandmother. The very idea that they had been circling her estate like vultures, acting like they were entitled to everything, made me sick. How had it come to this? How had I not known that they were capable of this? But there was still a problem. The will was unsigned. It wasn't valid on its own. I knew that. No one would take it seriously in court, especially without a signature, without witnesses. Still, it was something. It was evidence, a trail that led somewhere. The first thing I did was call my attorney, Andrea Wallace. She had been handling estate disputes for years and knew the outs of Florida law. I told her everything I had found, and I could hear the professional curiosity in her voice as she listened. "Thomas, this is interesting," she said after a long pause. "But you need more than this to move forward. A witness, maybe, or some other proof that this will was tampered with." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I understood. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. But I had a plan, and I wasn't going to back down. I had my grandmother's legacy to protect, and I was going to make sure nothing, especially not my parents, took it from me. I spent the next few days talking to tenants, old friends of my grandmother's, anyone who might remember details of the estate. Each conversation was like piecing together a puzzle. I heard story after story of my grandmother's dedication to those cottages, the way she had helped the people who stayed there, and how she had always maintained them with the same care to do everything else in her life. One of the tenants, an elderly man named Frank, had been living cottage 4 for years. He was a retired Coast Guard officer, quiet but sharp. When I asked him about Grandma, his face softened, like he was remembering something precious. "She always said she didn't trust your parents to handle these places," Frank told me, his voice low. Said they didn't understand people, only money. She trusted you though, told me you'd take care of it someday. I felt a lump form in my throat as I absorbed his words. Grandma had trusted me. And now it was clear she had seen something I hadn't. She knew exactly what my parents were capable of. I asked him if she had ever mentioned anything about a will. Frank hesitated, then nodded slowly. She did. She said she had an appointment with a notary right before she passed. She seemed relieved after that, he said. Relieved. Grandma had been worried, but she had taken steps to make sure her wishes were honored. I felt a sense of purpose settle over me. I had to find the missing pieces, the people who could confirm what she had planned. Over the next few days, I tracked down a notary who'd worked with Grandma before. His name was Samuel Rohr, a retired notary who had known her for years. He was in his 80s now, but still sharp as a tack. When I knocked on his door, he didn't hesitate to invite me in. Lieutenant Ward, he greeted me as if he had been expecting me. Heard you might be coming. I sat down with him, my heart racing, and asked if he had helped Grandma with any legal documents. He nodded, confirming that he had notarized her will, right at her kitchen table, just before she passed. She signed it in front of me. It was clear as day, he said, tapping the side of his head. I logged it just like any notarization. He went on to tell me the date, the time, and the tours who had witnessed the signing. My heart pounded as I processed this information. There was a logbook, a physical record that could confirm everything. I need that logbook, I said, my voice steady even though I felt anything but. Samuel stood and shuffled to a bookshelf, pulling out a thither-bound book. It was worn with age, but still intact. He handed it to me with the care of someone passing one a valuable artifact. I flipped to the page he pointed to, and there it was, her name, the date, the time, the signatures, the notary stamp. Tears pricked at the back of my eyes. This was it. This was the proof I needed. I had it. The will existed. It had been signed. And someone, somewhere, had hidden it from me. As I left Samuel's house, the weight of the discovery settled in. My parents hadn't just lied. They had destroyed the only document that could have this whole mess from happening. They had been trying to erase my grandmother's legacy, and now I knew exactly who was behind it. The fight was just beginning, but I had a feeling this would be a battle I was finally ready to win. I spent the next few days in a haze of activity, driven by an intense need to piece everything together. Every tenant I talked to, every person I interviewed, every scrap of evidence I uncovered seemed to lead me closer to the truth, yet farther from peace. I spent most of my time at the cottages, walking the gravel paths and staring out at the water. The sea breeze hit my face, cooling the edge of my frustration, but it never lasted long. The image of my parents trying to take what didn't belong to us, always at the back of my mind. It gnawed at me, and every day the anger grew a little stronger. My first real breakthrough came when I spoke to a retired Coast Guard man named Frank. He had lived in Cottage 4 for nearly 20 years, and become as much a part of the cottages as the weathered roofs and the salty air. Frank was quiet, thoughtful, but when it came to my grandmother, his memory was sharp. She didn't trust your parents with these places, Frank told me, sitting on his porch in the early morning sun, a cup of coffee in his hands. She said they only cared about the money. She always told me you'd be the one to take care of things. His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about the cottages or the properties. It was about trust. Grandma had trusted me, and now I had to earn that trust. But there was more to it. I had to find the missing pieces of the puzzle. My grandmother's words had always been precise, and she'd never left anything to chance. That's when I remembered the notary. My grandmother had mentioned meeting with someone, and Frank had confirmed it. She had signed something official. I didn't waste time. I contacted a notary I had been, an retired man named Samuel Rohr, who had worked with my grandmother in the past. He lived a few streets over, tucked into a corner of the town that still held on the charm of a forgotten era. I drove to his house with one thing on my mind: answers. When I knocked on his door, the man who greeted me was exactly as I had been told: sharp, stooped with age, but his eyes were still sharp, still watching. He greeted me, stepping aside to let me in. I heard you might be coming. I sat in his small living room, surrounded by old bookshelves and memories of a life well lived. Samuel Rohr was the kind of man who could make time stand with just a word, and when I asked him about the will, he didn't hesitate. "Oh yes, I remember her clearly," he said, his voice firm but warm. "She signed it right here at her kitchen table. It was clear. No question about it." I stared at him, my heart racing. "You notarized it?" He nodded, reaching for a worn ledger that was kept on a shelf behind him. He flipped through the pages, his fingers slowing as they found the right one. "She came to me a week before she passed. Said she wanted to get things in order. Made sure everything was official." I felt my breath catch in my throat. "You remember the date?" He nodded again, then tapped the page. The signing was done at noon on the 15th of the month. We had 2 neighbors as witnesses. It was all logged. I leaned forward, almost unable to process the words. "Can I see the log?" He shuffled over to a large bookshelf and pulled out a thither-bound book, aged by time but still intact. He handed it to me like it was a precious relic, and when I opened it, I found exactly what I needed: the name, the date, the time, the signatures of the witnesses, and Samuel's official stamp. This was it. The proof I needed. Bill had existed. It had been signed, and yet it had vanished. I looked up from the book, my mind reeling. "It's real. It really is real." Samuel sat down across from me, his face softening. "She trusted you, Lieutenant. She wanted you to have these cottages. She said you'd understand the people who stayed here, not just the business side of things." I felt a lump form my throat, my emotions caught between grief and relief. It wasn't just about money. It never had been. This was about preserving what my grandmother had spent her life building. I couldn't let it slip through my fingers. When I left Samuel's house that afternoon, I felt like I'll hold the weight of everything in my hands, every decision, every moment that had led me to this point. The path ahead was clearer now, but it wasn't easy. The battle I had to face was just beginning. As I drove back to the cottages, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the water. I glanced at the faded cottages, each one standing quietly, as if waiting for the next chapter of their story. My grandmother's legacy was still there, hidden in the walls, in the porch swings, in the small moments that made up the history of this place. But now, I had the pieces to fight for it. I knew the next steps wouldn't be simple. I knew the fight ahead would tear at everything I had left, but I had no choice. I wasn't going to let my parents erase my grandmother's wishes. Not without a fight. I called my attorney, Andrea Wallace, the moment I got back to my car. She picked up immediately, and I felt the tension in my shoulders ease just a little when I heard her voice. "We've got what we need," I said, my voice steady but full of purpose. "I have the proof. The notary, the witnesses, the logbook. We're moving forward with this." Andrea's voice was sharp with professionalism, but I could hear the approval in it. "All right, Thomas. We'll take it from here. But be ready, they won't give up easily." I took a deep breath and looked out at the cottages once more. "I never do," I said. But I was ready now. Ready to finish what my grandmother had started. The confrontation with my parents was inevitable. I knew that. I had expected it to come sooner or later. But I wasn't ready for how it would feel. I showed up at their house late one evening, my stomach tight with anticipation. I had the evidence now, the notarized logbook, the witness statements, everything that could prove my grandmother's wishes. But even with all of that, I wasn't sure how this was going to unfold. I couldn't predict how they would react, especially considering how they had already dismissed me when I first brought up the estate. The house smelled the same, dusty and old, with the faint scent of perfume lingering in the air. It was the house I grew up in, but it no longer felt like home. It felt more like a battlefield, a place where every word could be a trigger. When I walked through the door, both of them were already sitting at the kitchen table, papers strewn in front of them. It was as if they had been preparing for this moment, just as I had. My father was the first to speak, his tone clipped and controlled. "We've made some decisions about the cottages, Thomas," he said, not looking at me as he flipped through a stack of papers. "Your mother and I are taking full ownership. We've already started moving forward with the paperwork." I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. It wasn't just about the cottages anymore. It was about the way they had already assumed control, as if my grandmother's wishes didn't matter. "But, Dad," I said, my voice shaking despite my best effort to stay calm, "you can't just decide that." Grandma wanted me to manage them. She wanted me to take care of them. My mom didn't even look up from the pile of papers in front of her. She was confused. You were too young to understand anything she told you, she said in that familiar, dismissive way. You've always been the one to take everything so seriously. This is a family matter, and we've handled it. I bit my lip to keep from shouting. You've handled it. I repeated, trying to keep the anger in check. You've done nothing but let the cottages fall apart. You've taken them for granted your whole lives. My dad's jaw tightened, and I could see the muscles in his neck flex as he fought to keep his cool. You've been gone, Thomas. You've been off doing your Navy thing, while we've been dealing with the day, today. You think you can just waltz in here and take everything. I felt my chest tighten, the frustration building. This isn't about me just waltzing in, I said, my voice rising now. This is about what Grandma wanted. She left me in charge of these cottages. She trusted me to take care of them. A long silence followed. My mom's gaze finally flicked up to meet mine, but there was no warmth in it, only a coldness that made my skin crawl. You don't know everything, Thomas, she said slowly, her voice tight with something I couldn't quite place. You've always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. But you're wrong about this. We need the money, and we need the stability that these cottages can give us. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Michael, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. Is that what this is about? You're willing to sell off Grandma's legacy for a few $1,000s. It's not just about the money, my dad snapped, finally looking up at me. It's about survival. We've made sacrifices too. We've put everything into these properties for years, and now you think you can just come in and take over? I shook my head, fighting back the tears that threatened to rise. You never cared about the cottages. You didn't care about anything but the money. Grandma knew that. That's why she left them to me. My father stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Enough, he said, his voice low and angry. We don't have to explain ourselves to you. We've done what's best for this family, and you're not going to ruin it. I stood up too, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm not trying to ruin anything. I'm just trying to honor Grandma's wishes. The silence between us was thick with tension. My father turned away, clearly done with the conversation, but I wasn't finished. I couldn't be. Not when I knew the truth. I need to see the paperwork, I demanded, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. I need to see the will. The one you've been hiding. My dad stiffened, his back still to me. There is no will, he said without turning around. You're wasting your time. I'm not wasting my time, I said quietly. I'm the one's wasting it. I turned to leave, but my mom's voice stopped me. You're making a mistake, Thomas, she said, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. This isn't your fight. This is our decision. And you can't change that. I didn't turn back. I knew no point. They were already set in their ways, and nothing I said could change that. But I wasn't going to let them win, not this time. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the door closing by, I knew that the battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. And the next time I walked into that house, I wasn't going to leave until I had everything I needed to win. I had the will now. I had the proof. And I was going to make sure that my grandmother's wishes would be honored, no matter what it cost me. I had no choice. The days following my confrontation with my parents fell blur of paperwork, phone calls, and meetings with Andrea. I had expected the legal battle to be grueling, but it wasn't just the weight of the legal process that wore on me. It was the emotional toll. Each step felt like I was sinking deeper into a quagmire I couldn't escape. I spent hours reviewing the documents, sorting through the evidence I had gathered. The notary's log, the witness statements, Grandma's signed will, all of it had to be meticulously prepared for the court. Andrea had warned me that this wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't just about presenting the facts. It was about convincing the judge, about making sure every angle was covered. My parents had already shown their cards, and it was clear they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. One afternoon, Andrea and I sat at her office, surrounded by stacks of paperwork. Her office was small but efficient, lined with bookshelves crammed with legal texts and case files. The air smelled faintly of coffee and the hum of a near to the background noise of the city. You're making good progress, Thomas, Andrea said, her voice steady as she looked over the latest affidavit had gathered. But we need to make sure everything's airtight. We don't have much room for error. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. There was no room for error. If we lost this, everything Grandma had worked for would be gone. Do you think they'll fight this? I asked, running my fingers through my hair. The thought of facing my parents in court again made my stomach churn. They'll fight it, Andrea replied, her expression hardening. They won't give up without a fight. Your father's too proud, and your mother, well, she's already shown she'll do whatever it takes. They'll claim it's all a misunderstanding, that you're overacting. I don't care, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I don't care what they say. This is about honoring Grandma's memory. I'm not letting them destroy everything she built. Andrea gave me a sympathetic smile, her eyes softening just a little. I know, and that's why we're going to win. You have everything you need to prove it. We just need to stay focused. But staying focused was harder than I thought. Every time I tried to work through the case, my mind would run back to my parents' faces, my father's smug confidence, my mother's cold detachment. It felt like the world had shifted beneath my feet, and I didn't know where I stood anymore. A few days later, I got a call from Andrea. She'd been in touch with the local pastor who had worked Grandma for years. He had a statement, one that could change everything. Think you should come in, Andrea said, her tone urgent. The pastor's willing to testify. He's going to confirm that your grandmother had every intention of leaving the cottages to you. I felt a surge of hope. This was the breakthrough I'd been waiting for. If the pastor could confirm what I already knew in my heart, that Grandma had trusted me to take care of the cottages, then we had a real chance in court. I met Andrea at the church the next morning, the air thick of incense and old wood. The pastor, a gentle man named Pastor Thomas Green, was waiting for us in his small office. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were still sharp, still full of warmth. He offered me a seat and gestured for me to make myself comfortable. I've been thinking a lot about your grandmother lately, Pastor Green said as we sat down. She was a good woman, a kind woman, and she trusted you, Thomas. She told me herself that the cottages were meant to be yours. I felt a lump form in my throat. It was the validation I had been seeking, the confirmation I wasn't just chasing shadows. She said it to me once, in passing. Pastor Green continued, his voice quiet but firm. She trusted you to take care of the cottages. She knew you'd be the one to preserve them, not just for the money but for the people who came to stay. It wasn't just about renting out homes. It was about giving people a place to find peace. Tears stood at the corners of my eyes. Hearing him speak about my grandmother, hearing the conviction in his voice, made everything feel real again. It wasn't just about winning this fight. It was about honoring Grandma's memory, about carrying forward the legacy she had built. I'm willing to testify, Pastor Green said, breaking my worry. If it helps you, I'll tell the court exactly what she said. I'll tell them that she had every intention of leaving you the cottages. I nodded, my voice tight with emotion. Thank you. That means everything. The pastor smiled softly. It's the least I can do. She was always there for me, for all of us. It's only right that we help now. As I walked out of the church, the weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. The pastor's words gave me a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of property. I was fighting for my grandmother's legacy, for everything she had stood for. But the next step wasn't going to be easy. I had to face my parents again. And this time, it wasn't just a disagreement about the cottages. It was a battle for truth, one that would either tear me apart or start the long, painful process of healing. The following week, Andrea and I sat down to go over the final details of our case. The hearing was fast approaching, and we needed to be fully prepared. This is it, Thomas, Andrea said, looking at me with a level of seriousness I hadn't seen before. We're at the point of no return. Once the hearing starts, it's all in the judge's hands. But you've done everything right. You've got the evidence, you've got the witnesses. Now we just have to present it. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. The moment of truth was almost here. I had no idea how my parents would react, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't backing down. I couldn't. It wasn't just about winning in court. It was about making sure my grandmother's voice was heard, about making sure that her memory lived on in the place she had built. And I was going to fight for it. The morning of the hearing arrived with a strange mix of clarity and dread. I woke before my alarm, my mind already racing through the checklist I had reviewed 100 times over the past few days. I had everything I needed: witnesses, documents, the notarized will, Pastor Green's statement. The pieces were all in place. But as I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my Navy uniform, I couldn't shake the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just a courtroom fight for ownership of property. This was a fight for my family's integrity, for my grandmother's legacy. I arrived at the courthouse early, as I always did. There's something about standing at the edge of a challenge, waiting for the doors to open, that makes everything feel possible. The smell of old wood, the faint echo of footsteps in the hall felt like the calm before a storm. I took a deep breath as I walked through the front doors, the weight of the folder containing my grandmother's final wishes heavy in my hands. Inside, the courthouse was sterile and quiet, save for the soft murmur of voices from the other cases being heard that day. I found my seat and sat down, trying to control my breathing. Across the room, I could already see my parents. My father sitting with his arms crossed, his usual smug expression on his face, while my mother sat beside him, her eyes downcast, avoiding my gaze. Kyle was nowhere to be seen. I couldn't decide if that made me relieved or more worried. A few minutes later, Andrea walked in. Her sharp suit and confident stride were the anchor I needed in that moment. She gave me a small nod of reassurance before sitting next to me. "You're ready for this," she said quietly. "We have everything we need. They can't hide from the truth anymore." I swallowed, trying to focus on her words. She was right. I had the truth on my side. But that didn't make the upcoming battle any easier. I had spent years trying to repair the distance between me and my family, trying to keep the peace. Now, I was about to tear it all open. But I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for my grandmother, for the integrity she had instilled in me, for the values she had taught me that my parents had long since forgotten. The judge entered the room with the customary "all rise," and I stood up with the rest of the room, though my knees felt like they might buckle beneath me. The judge, an older man with silver hair and a steady gaze, took his seat and nodded to the bailiff. "Please be seated," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. I sat back down, my hands now clammy with nerves. The judge scanned the room, briefly looking over the docket. He nodded at the attorneys, signaling for the case to begin. My father stood up first, and I couldn't help but notice how confident he looked. The way he leaned slightly forward, as though he already had the victory in hand. "Your Honor," my father began, "the 7 vacation homes of the Florida Keys belong to my wife and me. There is no will. They were passed down to us, legally and rightfully. My damas has no claim to them." My stomach twisted as I listened to my father's words. I had expected it, of course. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing him dismiss me as though I were just some child throwing a tantrum, it hurt more than I thought it would. I wanted to stand up and shout at him, to tell him how wrong he was, but I stayed silent, focusing on the task at hand. The judge gave my father a measured look, his gaze calm but piercing. "Thank you, Mr. Ward," he said, then turned to me. "Miss Ward, your statement." I stood up slowly, my palms sweating as I walked to the front of the room. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times, but now that it was here, I felt unsteady. I took a deep breath and began. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady despite the nerves in my chest. "I am here today because my grandmother, Rosalind Ward, made it clear that she wanted me to take care of these properties. She entrusted me with the cottages, and I have the evidence to prove it. My parents, though they may claim ownership, have not been ones to maintain them. That responsibility fell to me, as it was always meant to." I could feel my father's gaze on me, sharp and dismissive, but I didn't let it break my focus. I turned to face the judge, holding up the stack of documents and carefully laying them out on the table. I have the notary's logbook, which confirms that my grandmother signed a will, naming me as the custodian of the cottages. I continued. I have witness statements from tenants who were close to my grandmother, as well as a sworn affidavit from Pastor Green, who can confirm her intent. My grandmother was very clear about her wishes. I paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. I knew the judge had been listening closely, and I could see the shift in his demeanor as he flipped through the documents I had provided. His brow furrowed slightly as he read, his eyes scanning the notary's logbook. After a moment, the judge looked up at my parents, his expression unreadable. "Is there anything you would like to add, Mr. and Mrs. Ward?" My father stood again, but this time, his posture wasn't as confident. "Your Honor, we've already made the necessary arrangements. There's no reason to complicate things. We've been handling this estate for years." The judge held up a hand, silencing him. "It seems to me that there is more to this than simply handling an estate," he said. "According to the documents, your daughter is entitled to these properties, at least for the time being. Until this matter is resolved, I will order a temporary halt to any sales or transfers of the cottages. The management will be temporarily placed under Miss Ward's control." My father's face went pale. My mother's hand tightened on the armrest of her chair. It was a small victory, but it felt like the first real one in this entire mess. The judge turned to me, nodding. "Miss Ward, I advise you to take this matter seriously. This is not just about property. It's about a family, and the court look at all the evidence before making a final decision. But for now, the cottages will remain under your management." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I had won this round, but I knew this wasn't over. My parents would fight this every step of the way. But for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. As I returned to my seat, I glanced over at my parents. My father was staring at me, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. My mother was silently wiping away a tear, though I couldn't tell if it was from frustration or regret. And Kyle wasn't here. But I knew he would be watching from somewhere, perhaps wondering what part he would play in all of this. The judge banged his gavel, signaling the end of the hearing. The courtroom settled into a heavy silence as everyone gathered their things. "We will reconvene in a few weeks," the judge said, voice firm. "In the meantime, I suggest the parties consider mediation. This is a family matter. I strongly encourage you all to resolve it outside of court if possible." As we stood to leave, Andrea leaned in close. "You did great. This is a huge win, Thomas. But it's not over yet. Be ready for the next round." I nodded, but inside, a small part of me was already preparing for what was to come. This battle wasn't over, it was just beginning. The days of the hearing felt like a haze of waiting. I had won the first round, but the weight of that victory didn't settle in the way I expected. Instead of feeling relieved, I felt a gnawing uncertainty that kept me on edge. My parents were still trying to maneuver their way out of this, still pushing their agenda even though the court had granted me temporary management of the cottages. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. I spent my days walking the cottages, making sure the tenants were taken care of, and organizing the repairs that had been neglected for years. It was a strange kind of solace, walking through the familiar paths that led between colored homes. The sound of the wind in the palm trees and the smell of salt water in the air should have brought comfort, but instead, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to explode. Every creak of the old buildings, every whiff of freshly painted shutters, reminded me that this was also fragile. It wasn't just the cottages I was holding together. It was my family, my grandmother's legacy, and a future that was still up in the air. One evening, after a long day of working on the cottages, I decided to stop by my parents' house. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, maybe a gesture of reconciliation or an admission of guilt. But as I pulled into their driveway, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. I wasn't walking in there as the son they could dismiss anymore. I was walking in as the man who had the truth on his side, and that truth wasn't going anywhere. When I entered, the familiar smell of cooked dinner wafted through the air, but there was no warmth in it. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. My father was pacing back and forth, as if he couldn't stay still. When they saw me, neither of them said anything at first. The silence between us stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, my father spoke. "We need to talk." I nodded and sat down at the table, facing both of them. I could feel my heart racing, the weight of everything pressing down on me. This wasn't going to be easy, but I was done avoiding it. "You've done what you needed to do, Thomas," my father continued, a voice heavy with frustration. But this isn't over. You're making a mistake. You don't understand the pressure we've been under. These cottages, your grandmother's cottages, they're not just a legacy. They're a lifeline. I wasn't surprised by his words, but they still stung. I had heard this all before, the same excuses, the same justifications. But now, I wasn't just hearing them as a son who wanted to make peace. I was hearing them as someone who had spent weeks uncovering the truth. "Dad," I said, my voice steady, "this isn't about the cottages being a lifeline. It's about doing what Grandma wanted. She trusted me. You're not seeing that, and you're certainly not respecting it. She didn't leave these properties to be sold off. She wanted them to be a place where people could come and find peace. She wanted me to protect that." My father stopped pacing, his face darkening. "You think I don't know that?" he snapped. "Your grandmother was a stubborn woman. She didn't understand how things really worked. She didn't understand the responsibility it takes to take something like this. She thought everything could just stay the same, but the world doesn't work that way. We've been trying to make it work, and now you're coming in disrupting everything." I didn't flinch at his words. The anger in his voice was familiar, but this time, it didn't have the power to make me shrink back. "You've been trying to make it work by taking something that wasn't yours," I said, my voice. "You've been trying to erase everything Grandma worked for, and now you want me to just step aside and let you do it. But I won't." There was a long pause as my father stared at me, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, I thought he might explode with rage. But instead, he took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. "What do you want from us, Thomas?" he asked quietly, the fight draining out of him. "What more do you want us to do?" "I want you to stop pretending like this is about any other than greed," I replied, my words coming out sharper than I intended. "I want you to stop acting like Grandma's legacy is just another asset for you to sell. I want you to respect her, even if you can't respect me." My mother, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke up. "You don't understand what we've been through, Thomas," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We've been struggling. You don't know the half of it. We've had to do things we're not proud of just to keep everything afloat. And now you want to come in and change everything. You think you're the only one who's sacrificed." I looked at her, my heart aching. It was clear that she was hurting. But it wasn't the kind of hurt that justified the way they were handling this situation. It was a hurt rooted in fear of losing control. "Understand more than you think," I said quietly. "I've sacrificed too, Mom. But I'm not sacrificing my integrity. I'm not sacrificing what Grandma wanted." The silence that followed felt heavy, thick with all the things we weren't saying. My parents were broken in ways I couldn't fix, and the realization hit me harder than I wanted it to. We weren't going to reconcile in a single conversation. We weren't going to fix this just by talking. "I'm not asking you to understand," I said, standing up. "I'm asking you to respect what Grandma wanted. I'm asking you to stop trying to control everything." As I turned to leave, my father's voice stopped me. "I don't know if I can respect that," he said, his voice low and filled with something I couldn't quite place. "But I'll think about it." I didn't look back. The door closed softly behind me as I stepped outside, the evening air cool against my skin. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I was finally standing my ground. Whatever happened next, I was ready for it. As I drove away, my mind raced, but something inside me had shifted. I couldn't change my parents. I couldn't make them see what I saw. But I could protect the cottages. I could honor my grandmother's memory. And for now, that was enough. The battle had only just begun, but I wasn't walking away from this fight. Not now. Not ever. The days following the hearing passed in a blur. The weight of the courtroom victory should have felt lighter, but instead, it only brought more questions. The legal battle wasn't over, but the next phase had begun. The process of settling things with my parents and finding a long-term solution felt endless, and I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. I spent mornings at the cottages overseeing the repairs, making sure everything was being taken care of. The smell of fresh paint and the sound of hammering echoed across the small property. It was oddly soothing. It gave me a sense of control, a sense that at least one part of my life was still anchored in something solid. But the weight of everything I was carrying, the legacy of my grandmother and the fractured relationships of my family, never let me forget for long. Every now and then, I would find myself standing on the porch of Cottage 2, looking out over the bay. The view was breathtaking, just as it had been when I was a child. The sun would rise over the horizon, casting a soft glow across the water, and I would remember Grandma's voice in my head, reminding me that even when everything felt upside down, there was still beauty in the world. It was her favorite time of day, and in those quiet moments, I could almost hear her humming from the kitchen, preparing her morning tea. But the peace never lasted long. My parents hadn't given up, and neither had I. They were still trying to work behind the scenes, still attempt to take control of the cottages in subtle ways. I had expected nothing less, but it didn't make it any easier. One afternoon, a few days after the hearing, I was at my car preparing to head over to the courthouse again for some paperwork when I saw a familiar face approaching. Kyle. My brother. He walked up to me slowly, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his shoulders slouched. I didn't know what to expect, but I certainly hadn't expected this. "Thomas," he said, his voice hesitant, almost apologetic. "You got a minute?" I studied him for a moment. His face was more worn than it had been when we were younger. His eyes were tired, and his posture sagged like someone who carrying a heavy burden for far too long. It made me pause, made me wonder if he was finally seeing things for what they nodded. "Sure. What's up?" Kyle looked down at his feet for a moment, then back up at me. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how things have been between us. I know I haven't been the best brother, and I haven't really been there for you. I messed up. I should have said something sooner, before all this started." I took a slow breath, trying to absorb his words. "I've heard that from you before, Kyle," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "But you've always been too late. We've been through this 100 times. You're sorry. You say you want to change. But then you just go back to same old habits. I don't know if I can believe you anymore." Kyle flinched, but he didn't look away. "I get it. But I'm actually doing something about it this time." He hesitated again, as if gathering the courage to say something he had been holding back. "I've been looking into a real treatment program, not the one I was pretending to do before. I'm gonna get help, Thomas. For real this time." The words hit me harder than I expected. Kyle wasn't a stranger to self-destructive behavior, and I had spent years watching him slide further away from the person he once was. But hearing him say he was actually trying, for once made me stop. "You're serious?" I asked, my voice softening. I had always wanted to believe him, but the years of disappointment had built a wall around my heart. He nodded. "I'm serious. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or to believe I've changed. But I want you to know I'm doing this for me, not for anyone else. I wanted to tell you that before everything goes further. I don't want you to hate me for what I've done." I could feel the years of frustration, of anger, start to loosen their grip on me. But I also knew that this was a magic fix. Change didn't happen overnight, and Kyle had a long road ahead of him. Still, something in me softened. "You're gonna have to prove it," I said, my voice steady. "But I'll support you. If you really want to change, then I'll help you. I'll be there for you. But it's on you now, Kyle. I can't do this for you anymore." He nodded, his expression a mixture of gratitude and shame. "Thanks, I won't let you down." The conversation didn't fix everything. It didn't heal the rift between us or erase the years of resentment. But it was a step. A small one, but it was something. A few days later, I found myself sitting at Grandma's old kitchen table, the same table she had used to write all those notes, to plan every detail of her life. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow through the windows. It was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't sure what the future held for me, or for my family. The cottages still needed protection, and my parents weren't giving up yet. But I had learned something over the past few months. I had learned that sometimes, the greatest strength came not from winning every battle, but from knowing when to stand firm, when to let go, and when to walk away. The next morning, I woke up early, the light of the sunrise filtering the blinds, and I felt different. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't some grand victory. It was quieter. It was peace. I went outside barefoot to make my rounds around the cottages. The breeze ruffled my hair, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the air. As I walked from one cottage to the next, checking the hedges, making sure everything was in order, I realized something. This was mine now. Not just the cottages, but the life I was building. It wasn't perfect, and it was enough. A few hours later, as I sat on the porch of Cottage 4, looking out at the water, I heard footsteps behind me. My parents. They stood at the base of the steps, watching me. I didn't know what to expect, but I had learned not to expect much from them anymore. "We've been talking," my father said, his voice softer. "We want to thank you." I looked up at him surprised. "Thank me?" He nodded. "For not destroying us, for not making this worse than it already is." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't looking for gratitude. I wasn't looking for anything from them except respect. But it was a start. "You're welcome here," I said quietly, my eyes on the horizon. "But the cottages aren't for sale. Not ever." My mother wiped her eyes, and my father let out a breath, one that felt like acceptance, like something had shifted. As they walked away, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel closure. But I felt a shift, something that had been broken starting to heal. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Later that evening, I found Kyle sitting on the dock looking at the water. I sat down beside him, not saying anything at first. Just the two of us, watching the sunset in silence. Finally he spoke. "I'm checking into a program." His voice shaky. "A real one. I messed up. But I'm trying." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my chest. "Then find your way back," I said softly. He didn't answer right away, but his shoulders relaxed. Just a little. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe, we could find our way back together. The next few weeks were quieter. I focused on the cottages, on making them what Grandma had always intended them to be: homes, not assets. I restored the gardens, fixed the roofs, and updated the rental system. Word spread, and the former tenants began to return, visiting the cottages like old friends. And as I sat on the porch, looking out at the cottages, I knew I had done right. Grandma's legacy was safe. My family was fractured, but maybe we could start the long, slow process of healing. "Protect them," Grandma had said. And I would, Ted, and I would protect myself. Because that's what family was about. Protecting each other, even when it was hard, even when it seemed impossible. As I finished my cup of coffee, I stood up and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything I had fought for settle into place. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough.